Hi, guys. Oh, my God, it's Ugly Bob! What the hell are you doing here?
Coming in at number 10 is Mercury City Meltdown from SSX. I'm not really a huge fan of the series. I mean, I enjoy the extreme sports angle of it, but by the third game I was kind of like, what's the point, you know, the emphasis on high scoring. But I definitely enjoyed watching other people play the stages in the first two games, SSX and SSX Tricky, to the point that it made me want to play the game. And I don't think any stage exemplified this better than the one known as Mercury City Meltdown. I'm not really sure what it is. It could be the crazy half pipes, just the overall look of the stage, the fact that it takes place at night, maybe it's just the name, but it's definitely the coolest stage I've seen in the entire game. When a stage in a game can make you interested in a game, even if you tell yourself, I don't want to play this game, you know it's got to be something special, and the Meltdown is like that. The Dinosaur Forest from Final Fantasy VI. Not only is this the best power-up place in the entirety of Final Fantasy VI, it's just really cool overall to find the notion of a giant forest relatively isolated in the game that is full of nothing but dinosaurs. I wasn't alone in declaring way back in 1994 that this was essentially Jurassic Park. It didn't hurt that the movie had just come out a year before. So imagining Locke and Terra, or Tina to your Japanese fans, going into a forest and just slaughtering dinosaurs with the power of Ultima and tons of other stuff was very appealing to us. Of course, the very occasional economizer drop from the monstrous brachiosaurs, boy were those guys tough, made it all worthwhile. You would eventually get so powerful you could do it solo, like Setzer with his fixed dice, and it's not just a great power-up place, it's just a lot of fun to mess around with, even if you didn't abuse the Vanished Doombug. Overlooking the destruction of Atlantis from God of War, Ghost of Sparta. Immediately after you defeat the monstrosity known as Scylla, or Scylla, however you pronounce that, you have to climb out of the pit caused by the volcano quickly erupting and destroying Atlantis. And as you're walking around, you see a lot of people screaming and yelling, and you almost kind of forget what you have just done and what is the result as Atlantis starts to sink. I mean, you could attribute it to Kratos not caring about anybody, so the player doesn't even realize it as he's walking along. But as you make your way further up the path in between defeating monsters, you see the volcano in the distance that the city draws its geothermal power from, and all the boulders and lava spews and whatever are coming straight out, and it's just a beautiful and evocative scene that made me pause for several minutes when I first got there, not just because of what Kratos had done and how Poseidon was later pissed off in God of War 3 about it, but because of the impeccable timing of the whole scene. It was just a masterful moment, and I love it, every bit of it. It's probably the best scene in the entire God of War series. For number 7, we have the Egg Carrier from the original Sonic Adventure. Most of this game really felt like a Mario 64 ripoff. Maybe it was the hub world, the very poor attempt at having a story. I mean, fans could enjoy it, but the stages didn't really feel special to me until we got to Robotnik's flying fortress, known as the Egg Carrier. As stupid as that name is, you gotta remember in Sonic 2 it was called the Death Egg, and somehow that ended up working. Anyway, when you finally get aboard, it's a really elaborate stage that really seems well designed for the 3D aspects of Sonic Adventure. Sonic in 3D has always been accused of never being able to favor speed as well as the 2D games, and for the most part that's true. But if there's any stage that feels like it accomplishes this in 3D, it would be the Egg Carrier, because you have to move at a pretty rapid pace, be it with the parts of the terrain that starts falling apart, or just the overall pace of the stage. It feels like you're really on a tight schedule and you have to get inside before Robotnik does whatever he does, and I'm probably looking too much into it, but there it is. Oh, and the music, Skydeck A Go-Go, makes it awesome, not just because saying A Go-Go is awesome, but because it's a kick-ass rock theme. You can criticize Sonic favoring rock music or rock-like music, but I don't think anyone can disagree that this is an awesome piece of music. For this entry, we have Giant Land from Super Mario Bros. 3. This is somewhat of an entry that I feel just has to be on the list. I could probably think of better entries, but I'll fully accept this is a very memorable area. Anyway, this is World 4 of the iconic game Super Mario Bros. 3, and the simplistic premise that it's normal Mario platforming, but everything is giant, is a simple idea to be sure, but it's so well realized visually that you can't help but smile at it. Everything from the giant clouds that are watching you in the background, to the giant Goombas, to the giant piranha plants. It's just a lot of fun to go through. It's not my personal favorite world of all time in any of the Mario games, but I don't think anyone cannot think on it and go like, damn, that's a pretty unique concept, stage, world, whatever. Vice City from Grand Theft Auto Vice City. While Grand Theft Auto 3 might have been the first game to realize a 3D city as well as it did, and it can also be argued that San Andreas in the same titled game is more sprawling and detailed, for me, Vice City in the same game is by far the best location ever in any of the Grand Theft Auto games. It could be how it's not very subtly based on Miami, the numerous references to Scarface, the characters that inhabit it, or just the general look of it, but everything about it makes me favorite over any other Grand Theft Auto world. It's just a lot of fun. I like the airport, long strips of land along the beach, the tool shops, the pedestrians seem to be funnier than in the other games too. Maybe it's something as dumb as like, oh, the terrain is mostly flat with a few exceptions, so it makes driving fast a lot more fun. Hey, I didn't say every entry on this list had to make sense. This is just my personal choice. I like Vice City a whole lot. Village from Resident Evil 4. I think more than anything, this is one of the coolest places in video games history. Not just my opinion, but because of the utter evocative nature of it. A lot about Resident Evil 4 was not really well known before the game came out. You know, like, we knew it had gone through several different versions and that the game was going to be something different, but it wasn't until we saw Leon S. Kennedy really start trekking toward this out-of-the-way village somewhere in the Spanish countryside that we realized how special of a game that Resident Evil 4 was going to be. Pretty much everything about the village looks outstanding in how different it is and how great it is at creating a mood inside the video game. From when you first look through your binoculars to see what the fate of one of the police officers is, to Dr. Salvador, the way the villagers speak, the way you see them going about their mundane daily tasks until they're like switched on by your presence and proceed to try and murder you. And it's just an utterly amazing setting. And you spend quite a lot of time in the village, you know, all the way up to Chapter 3 pretty much, and you'll see more diverse locations as you make your way to the church and see Ashley and stuff like that. The other section that comes to mind is when you're crossing the rope ladders and you see the lake far below. I remember the first time I played the game, I really expected something really to jump out or something really weird to happen like that, so I kept looking down with my gun after reading that note about the Del Lago, and I was like, even though it didn't end up being true, it's just amazing how the game can totally set up a mood for you. And even to this day, when I believe this is the 15th time I'm playing the game just recently, I still look at the setting as I pass by and I'm like, this is so involving. I mean, I just love going through the whole village section all the way up until the final confrontation with Batoris Mendez. I don't think there's one part that is boring or has stuff that isn't fun to look at. For number 3, we have Chronopolis from Chrono Cross. A lot of the game Chrono Cross is kind of like spent leading you around. You're not sure what's going on plot-wise, but as you get into the later parts of Disc 1, you start to see a coherent story forming, and this really all comes to a head by the time you find the time fortress known as Chronopolis. References to Chrono Trigger are sporadic throughout the game, but hardcore fans of that game will notice tons of them throughout Chronopolis, making this whole part awesome. The music is mysterious in a kick-ass way, not so much as the higher entries on our list, but it's not only the way that Chronopolis looks, how much more futuristic it is than the rest of the game, but the mysteries that will be revealed there that affect both the plot of Cross and Trigger, and the many interesting commentaries that the scientists have to relate to the scientific medium and scientific study at whole. I was deeply intrigued by the concept of apes evolving due to Lavos' influence, and even considered the real-world applications of that. The discussions of black holes are great, and probably are what gave game theory the idea to start a show, from what I understand. It's the kind of place that I deliberately listen to the conversations multiple times just to take it all in, and I was amazed at the quality of the writing and how interesting pretty much everything about Chronopolis is. Now, it's this entry, number 2 and number 1, that had me thinking of this list probably years ago. It was just, the choice seemed obvious and I had to go from here. This is Zeal Palace from Chrono Trigger. Everything about this place is awesome. From the moment you walk into the palace with its ominous music compared to the rather halcyon-sounding theme of the rest of the Kingdom of Zeal, you know something's up. It's just a ominous, mysterious theme that accentuates how dark and foreboding your presence within the palace seems. Sure, you've heard the music earlier, so you might be starting to suspect, okay, there are connections to what we've seen in the past with Frog and Magus, but maybe it's just me. The first time I got to Zeal, I didn't make that connection, so I was like, uh-oh, something's about to go down, this isn't gonna end well. And, of course, anyone who's played Trigger thoroughly knows how the Magic Kingdom of Zeal ends. Much like our number 3 entry, nearly everything everyone has to say here is interesting, and that's probably because, even more so than Chronopolis, to be frank, the rest of the world of 1200 BC is a shithole. Everyone else is boring, they don't really have anything going on in their lives, and I know you can say, well, that's because the Enlightened Ones engineered it that way, but that's something as a gamer that I can kind of ignore plot-wise and just get into it, you know, the apparent inequality between the societies in this time period of Chrono Trigger, but I just don't care. I mean, you've got everything to like about it. You can find numerous hidden items throughout it. You get hints about future side quests like the Sun Palace and the Elemental Palace. There's plenty of news running around and everybody loves that. You've got to love the little arrogant attitude of many of the people who live there. You know, maybe it's justified, but I love how in the original Super Nintendo version they're like, oh, you must have the same power as us. It must be so much weaker by comparison. You poor things. Wow, what a bitch. To wrap this up, it also has Janus, who everyone knows, and his little cat Alphador, and you've got to love that. Finally, coming at number 1, we have Estar from Final Fantasy VIII. This entry is pretty much the same as number 2, but the big difference is the people aren't arrogant, and that's pretty much the reason it has the status of number 1 on my list. Because honestly, its music isn't nearly as catchy, and can sound even kind of fruity at times, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, Estar is by far the most advanced country in the entire world of Final Fantasy VIII, to the point that all the plot points that indicate the reasons why, you kind of ignore them and they're glossed over for most of the game. So when you finally do arrive at this city after coming across the tracks at Fisherman's Horizon, you have to look to yourself and realize what you're about to see when you first see the portal in the middle of the sky and you're climbing in and you're going, wow, the soldiers you've seen throughout the game are really no indication of the level of technology here. Everything about the city is amazing, from the futuristic look of it to the information you glean about the plot, as nonsensical as it can be at times. Dr. Odin is a lot of fun, despite how quirky he is, and of course the ultimate spoiler is when you find out just who the president of Estar is. I guess you can consider that to be a very weak plot twist, but I was amused by it throughout. Anyway, Estar is ultimately the coolest place I've ever seen in a video game, because it's not just the kind of place that's a lot of fun to visit, Everything is a lot of fun to look at. The people are interesting to talk to. You can get lots of cool items in the shopping district. It really seems like almost to the point where you can criticize Final Fantasy VIII as much as you want, but it feels like the people in charge of designing Estar were like a separate team from the rest of the game, because I can definitely see the flaws in the rest of the world and maybe even how boring the rest of the world is. It's almost like the developers knew they were going to have you over a barrel when they finally showed off their ultimate location, and they knew you were going to love every minute of it. No one event in Estar better shows this than when the President's aide first greets you with the following phrase: "We have made many advances since the time of the sorceress. Enjoy." Oh, indeed I will. Indeed I will.
Pizza